Hello, hello. Welcome to the last day of JNUC. If you went to the party last night, I hope you had a great time. It was a lot of fun. My name's Jordan. I'll be your host here. And I have the absolute pleasure of introducing Michael here, and he's going to be doing your session. So give him a round of applause. And
Thanks, Jordan. Morning, everyone. Did everyone make it to the party last night? Yeah, some nods. I can see some coffees on the table. Thanks so much, first of all, for coming here at 9 a.m. after the JNUC party. Really appreciate it. We're going to be talking about how we can successfully deploy out shared iPad utilizing Jamf School. If I was in marketing, I would say we're going to elevate that experience. But before I wrote this, before we knew about the main keynote, we're going to talk about it from a purposeful point of view. So as Jordan said, my name's Michael. As you can probably tell, I'm not from here. I'm based out of Scotland. I'm a sales engineer. And I look after our partners and customers in Middle East and Africa and Central Eastern Europe. Now, I promise I've only had one coffee this morning. We are known for talking quickly. So if I do speed up, feel free to flag me down and tell me to slow down. Happy to do that. But we're going to be having a look at how we can successfully deploy shared iPads utilizing Jamf School. With a quick show of hands, if I can see you because of the bright lights, how many people have used shared iPad in the past or are currently using it? Great, perfect. So there's some people who don't know maybe what shared iPad is or not using it. We're going to cover some of that today. So when we think about the term shared devices, let's say, there are really two options that we have when it comes to managing them in a school environment. We have the option of Apple shared iPad. And the great thing with that is that's where you can get that clear data separation between all of your students. So student A will sign in, they get access to their resources, and then student B will then sign in, they have access to theirs, completely separate from student A. But we also have the option of common iPads. And that could be where you might have like a trolley or a cart of devices where you go and pick one up and you start using it. It's not personalized to you specifically. You might actually have like a custom wallpaper. You might have the apps laid out in a certain way. But ultimately, it's not your iPad. It doesn't feel like yours. You might think of that like as, an iPad on a trolley, or if you think back to home, it could be like a shared device in your household. I know that my Apple Music library is completely destroyed because of my children. So it's kind of like that, right? Now, today, we're going to be focusing on Apple shared iPad. That's our main focus for today. Now, I appreciate it's early in the morning, and you may have already forgotten what the title is, but we're going to be referring to it throughout today. And I felt for today's structure, it might actually help if we broke each section down. So we're going to start off with the planning part, because when we deploy a shared iPad, it's not just a case of, I'm going to enable it, and let's just go. We don't want to test in production. There are some things that we want to think about and plan out before we go into deployment. So kind of organize this into three different parts. We've got Apple School Manager, we've got MDM, hopefully Jamf School, and then also around the data side of things as well. So let's expand on Apple School Manager first of all. If you've been managing iPads already in your districts or in your schools, you'll know how foundational Apple School Manager is. And I say this because the region that I work in, believe it or not, there's countries that don't have access to Apple School Manager. Imagine trying to deploy iPads where you don't have access to apps and books or automated device enrollment. Everything is kind of going back to the Apple configurator days at that point. So when we're thinking about shared iPad or just deploying out to devices in general, we know apps and books are really important. That's where we get the licenses from Apple School Manager, and that way we can have them deployed out to devices without the need of an Apple account. Now, to set up a shared iPad, we need to do this using automated device enrollment. You could go old school and plug it into a computer and use Apple Configurator to set it up as a shared iPad. But ultimately, if you've got access to Apple School Manager, automated device enrollment is the easiest way to get that device up and running. And we also have classes. This is where we organize like our school roster. We're able to make sure that we've got the right year groups in the right place and have that information synced between Jamf School and Apple School Manager. But the key part that I really want to highlight here is for Apple Shared iPad to work, we need to utilize managed Apple accounts. So with Apple Managed Accounts, this is what the student is going to use to log into a shared iPad. Essentially, they will be presented with a login screen. They type in their managed Apple account. I think it's safe to say, if we have a look here, it's not really a rememberable managed Apple account, is it? It's probably easier if you were to remember your own email address. So if you do federate your identity provider with Apple School Manager, your managed Apple accounts turn from being that really long email address into a shorter one, probably more specific and unique to the individual. So that's the key part when we're utilizing managed Apple accounts. You could deploy out iPads to your schools without managed Apple accounts, but we really need it when it comes to utilizing Apple Shared iPad. Okay, so that's a little bit of the planning part with Apple School Manager. We're going to touch upon this a little bit more later, but now let's look at the MDM side. Now you might be thinking, Michael, you've just copied and pasted the same actions as before. And you're right. We still need our MDM, Jamf School, to deploy out apps and books that we have got the licenses from Apple School Manager. We still need to set up that automated device enrollment profile so that the devices get set up the right way. And we also need classes to be able to utilize the managed Apple accounts. So technically, though it's the same list, it's still important that we have this configured and set up inside of Jamf School. But the one down at the bottom here is really around storage and user quotas. Because when it comes to our iPads, yes, we can have them set up and ready to log in, but actually we might be limited with the amount of space that's left on them and how that data works. So if we think about an iPad, which is not being deployed out one-to-one, right? We're doing shared iPad to multiple users. What will happen is each user gets a portion of space on that device. If we think about a 64 gigabyte iPad, it's not just a simple case of, right, I'm going to split this 4 ways, and each user gets 16 gigabytes. There's actually more to it than that. So let's break this down. When we have our iPad and we enable Apple Shared iPad, the first 10 gigabytes is always set up for the operating system. So 10 gigabytes straight away, you've kind of like lost from the user space. We need that for iPadOS 26, right? Building on top of that, we then need space for our apps and media. So from there, we're dedicating 16 gigabytes to that part. Now, if you do have more than 16 gigabytes of apps and data, that's then going to take from the user space, okay? But let's say we've got within 16 gigabytes here. So what's left is our user space. And for anyone who's good at maths, I'm sorry that I've given you the answers on the screen here. Also, if you have a terabyte iPad being utilized for Apple Shared iPad, please come and speak to me. I would love to know how you're able to justify that to your finance teams. I would love to know that. But I thought I'd put it there just in case. But ultimately, what we have there is the 38 gigabytes left for users to be able to split up. And that is fine, but let's say, for instance, one student is using 25 gigabytes of that space. Doesn't really leave a lot of space for the other users to maybe come in and start using it. So there's some ways that we can simplify this process. What we can actually do is we can say, right, when we're setting up Shared iPad, we want to only have 4, or insert your own number, of locally stored users at any given time. So even though I've got that 38 gigabytes of space, I'm going to say I only want to have 4 users. So what happens here is that each user is already assigned the amount of storage. You don't need to worry about, oh, student A is going to use too much compared to student B. And obviously that goes up depending on the storage of your iPad as well. But what this does is it actually blocks out the rest of the storage for that particular user. So that means if they do start to use more than, let's say, 121.5 gigabytes of storage, then what it will start to do is offload some of that data back into the cloud. It won't be necessarily locally stored on the device. It will go back up to the cloud. Now, since we're talking a little bit about storage and data, it's probably a good time to actually talk about the data part. Where does the user data actually go? Is it on the iPad? Is it in the cloud? Do we need a caching server? What is a caching server, right? We need to think about this as part of our planning. So let's look at this part here. Now, as we said at the beginning, we're utilizing managed Apple accounts, which means that we're going to be natively using iCloud. And the great thing in education is that we all get 200 gigabytes of iCloud storage, which is great. You don't get that in the enterprise space. I can't tell you how many times I have to have those conversations. They're like, we only get 5 gigabytes. I'm like, should be in education. You get 200, okay? So it's great. You all get lots of storage. Now let's say our first student signs in, okay? From here, they go about doing their normal work. They're opening up apps, they're utilizing notes, they're building out maybe their project work. Now, once they're finished, they sign out of that iPad session. And what happens now is that their data is starting to upload to iCloud. And it will continue to upload to iCloud even if another student signs in. So now our second student has signed into this iPad. The data from the first student is still uploading in the background, which is great. And at some point, that will then complete, okay? From there, our second student is using the iPad. They're doing their own work, utilizing notes, things like that. And when they sign out, same thing happens. Their information is going to start uploading into iCloud, and at some point, it's then going to complete. And now what we have is our data stored locally on the iPad, as well as a copy in the cloud. Now, you might be familiar seeing those downloading cloud icons because you might have upgraded your device at one point and seen the little cloud icon to download those apps. And we could have just left it there with one shared iPad. But I think we all can agree that students, children, like to throw curveballs. And let's say, for instance, the student goes and picks up a different iPad and starts to want to use it. So from here, because their data isn't stored locally on the iPad, it will need to download from iCloud. So that's fine. It will then start to download from the cloud, and they can start utilizing on the iPad. But then what do you think is going to happen on the first iPad? It's no longer going to be aligned with the second iPad. Because with shared iPads, it will only update the data if it's logged into that session. So since we're not logged in on the first iPad, it's not actually downloading that data in the background until they log back in. It's kind of like what we do on a Mac. If you've got different user accounts, you'll see the data update once you've logged back in. So now we've got 2 different devices. The second student has their data in 2 different places, but it's not too much of a problem. But if we were to multiply this, let's say we're going to multiply not just the number of devices, but the number of students, that's probably going to have an impact on your internet speeds, probably your internal network bandwidth. And so what we can do to help this is actually bring in the idea of a caching server. So the caching server is physically in your school, and so if a student, in this case we're going with student number 2, was to upload information back into the cloud, it would actually route through your caching server first of all, before going to the cloud. Which means that if they were then to pick up, let's say, a third device and sign in, the idea is that the caching server is going to deliver that content to the iPad rather than having to try and pull it from iCloud. Now, this is great when it comes to app updates and software updates because you could have that information cached locally without having to constantly communicate out to the cloud. It's great in a school situation when you're utilizing shared iPad and you're moving that data around. But hopefully now, we can all think that we're in sync, okay? Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm a dad, so I'm going to have some dad jokes. We can say bye-bye-bye to that one. So caching servers definitely help, right? I saw some shakes of the head there. It's okay, don't worry. Caching server is going to help with managing the data side, okay? And this is key when we are moving between different devices. But if you go and have a look at Apple's documentation when it comes to deployment of shared iPad, there's a bit here that I'm just going to call out. I'm going to read directly from the slide because I think I need to read it word for word, which is when a user signs out of an iPad, that data is held locally and appears automatically in iCloud. So hopefully we saw that earlier, right? You saw that, the diagram that we used. But when that user signs into a different iPad, their data is downloaded from iCloud. Great. We saw that as well. Now, another part of this documentation highlights that it's recommended that you plan for users to return to the same device each time. Now, that could be a little bit challenging, and we're going to look at some ways that we can help that. But if you are deploying out shared iPad, or if you're thinking about it, keep this in mind, that Apple want, for the best experience, for students to return to the same device. And the reason being is their data is there. It's locally stored. We don't need to worry about downloading it from iCloud again. Now, also part of that data piece are the apps. So inside of Apple School Manager, when you're going through and assigning apps, you might have seen some apps actually highlight which ones are optimized for shared iPad. So just be mindful of this. What this does is it means that it's utilizing the iCloud framework to store the data. It's going to be stored inside of the managed Apple account. Now, that's not me saying you can't use Google Drive or OneDrive, but those apps will not show optimized for shared iPad because they are their own cloud hosting service. So just be mindful that if you are going to be using third-party cloud-hosted storage solutions, you just need to make sure that data is there before they sign out. So just a little caveat there. But anything that works directly or natively with iCloud, as soon as you sign out, it's then going to upload in the background automatically for you. All right. Quite a lot of planning there for shared iPad. So let's actually have a look at the impact of this, okay? We've got everything set up. We've got Apple School Manager. We've got Jamf School. We know about the data side of things. I think we're good to go. So let's actually see this in action, right? Here's our iPad, and I'm assuming that the majority of you have seen this screen here for setting up an iPad. This is us going through automated device enrollment, so we needed Apple School Manager for that, and also Jamf School. And when we start to enroll this iPad, it goes through the normal process. It downloads that configuration profile and the education profile onto the device. Great. And what you normally expect is for the rest of the setup to continue. But then suddenly, this happens. And you're thinking, oh no, I'm going to have to plug it into a Mac, I'm going to have to DFU it and put it back to factory settings and go through all that process. But actually, this is expected behavior with shared iPad. It has to restart itself so that it can then load up and present the new login screen for shared iPad. We don't get this when we just set up an iPad normally. This is unique to shared iPad. Now here we can see it's going in the process of downloading my custom wallpaper, and it's giving me the sign-in screen here. Now to make things a little bit easier, I've already added the domain for my managed Apple accounts onto the keyboard. Now you can actually set this up inside of Jamf School if you're not going to be utilizing the federated authentication. But if you are using federated authentication, it would just be your standard email. And again, you can put the domain there to make it easier to type out. From there, our user is then going to sign in, and then they're going to get access to all of the apps on this shared iPad. Okay? In here, we can see the apps. We're logged into their space. And from there, they're able to go through and start working. If a user was to sign out, the student to sign out, and then a different student sign in, they'll see the same app layout, see the same apps, but from there, they're not going to see student A's set of data, as it were. But I don't think that's really purposeful at this point in time. All that we've done is enable the features that we need to get to this point. But there's more that we can do. The title of this session was From Planning to Impact, but the sort of subtitle, as it were, is with purpose. And there's some really nice features inside Jamf School to actually make this more purposeful. We want to make this experience great for students, for teachers, and for IT admins, because we want to try and remove as many headaches as possible. So there's more that we can do inside of Jamf School. And this is where it kind of ties into the classes part. But we're going to have a look. So first thing that we're going to do when we're inside of Jamf School, we're just going to navigate to our automated device enrollment profiles. And that's the first place that we're going to navigate to. Because inside of here, this is where we define our enrollment profile, and then we're also enabling that shared iPad feature. Now, if we think back to in our planning section around the storage versus user quotas, this is where we've got the option for the storage configuration. Here, we've got the option to define how many resident users, that's how many local users, can be stored on an iPad at any given time. So right now, mine is set to 4. You do have other options to say, well, we'll just make it a free-for-all. We'll just have, that last pool of storage for as many students as they want. But here I'm limiting it to only having 4 storage users at any one time. Now, the other thing that we're just going to check in Jamf School, back to our planning, is around those managed Apple accounts. So inside of Jamf School, we can go to users, and we can see that our managed Apple accounts have synced between Jamf School and Apple School Manager. So this is another key part. We want to make sure that the right student has the right managed Apple account to sign in. From there, we're then going to have a look at classes. Now, I've built out some classes here already. And the first thing that I'm going to do is go into year 1, and there's a nice little button on the left which says Add Shared iPads. And what you can do is assign your shared iPads to this class. This changes the experience for students in just a moment, and I'm going to show you that. Now, you can change the scope of this. Let's say, for instance, you might have 2 carts, 2 trolleys worth of shared iPads. You could say, right, cart A is going to be assigned to years 1, 2, and 3. Cart B is going to be for 4, 5, and 6. And what we're doing here is by enabling the shared iPad option for this class, we then get even more features unlocked inside of Jamf School. So the next part that we're going to have a look at are the restrictions side of things. So this is where we can actually go and define restrictions for the users in this class. Now, if you've already been deploying out iPads, you already know about the restrictions profile. You probably put those restrictions in place. And that's classed as a device restriction. That's a device configuration profile. With this one here, this restrictions profile is user-based, which means that if this user is in this class, we're going to add on these extra restrictions. So here, this is where I could, don't allow the use of the camera, or Siri. We can make this granular between different year groups and different classes. And then building upon that as well, we can actually go through the app section. So we can actually define, rather than seeing all the apps that we had deployed out to the shared iPad, we can say, actually, for this class, we're only going to have these apps visible to them. It's not to say that we're going to delete all the other apps. We still want them there. But what we're doing is we're hiding them from the students. So when they sign in, they're only seeing the apps that are assigned automatically to their class. So just by enabling that Add Shared iPad to a class feature, we've actually unlocked a whole lot more that we can do. I think the right thing now is to actually show you that experience from the student's perspective. So inside of here, now we've got our shared iPad. It looks completely different. We don't have that login window anymore where you can type in the managed Apple account. We have the classes that we've already assigned to the shared iPad. Now, being from Scotland, I was encouraged to wear a kilt for this, but I didn't. So the next best thing was to name all of my students the most Scottish names possible. So here in year 1, we're going to get Alistair to sign in. And we type in our passcode. So this has actually been defined already through Apple School Manager. And Alistair is now into his user space. This is the same iPad. It still has all the other apps that you saw before. The difference is we're limiting the apps to this particular year group. Now, Alistair can go about his day-to-day work. He's able to go into files. He can check some of his project work. Because it's the first time that he is signed in on this device, that's why we have those little cloud arrows pointing down, because we don't have any of that data locally stored. Alistair then go into the Notes app, check some of the notes that he had previously, and again, can continue that work on the iPad. Now, once Alistair is finished with his class, with his work, we just swipe down from the top of the iPad, and we select Sign Out. And that will then take us back to our main screen. But what we see now is that we can see our local user, Alistair, is one of our recent users now. We still see the classes, but we can see our local user who is on this iPad. Now, you might have seen also when we were signing out, it said Notes, and it had that spinning wheel. That's it updating the data inside of iCloud. Again, if there was lots of data, we're not just stuck on that loading screen. This is still happening in the background. So now we're going to get Katrina to sign in. She's in year number 2. So we'll get her to sign in with her super secret passcode, which is definitely not 1, 2, 3, 4. And then now she gets her apps, different from Alistair's set, right? We still got the same wallpaper, but the apps that we've assigned to year 2 are different than year 1. And again, Katrina can go through her apps and projects. She can go into files. We don't see Alistair's data here at this point. We're seeing Katrina's. Again, because we've got the little cloud icons, it's because Katrina hasn't logged into this device before. That's why we need to download that data. Same with notes. We've got completely different projects that we're working on here. It's the same iPad. We've still got all the apps available, but we're making this experience for the teachers and for students, I think, in a more purposeful way. We don't need to rely on typing in an email address. A 4-digit passcode is probably going to be a better experience for younger students especially. And that's great for students. But you might be thinking, well, how's this going to impact our teachers? Because how are we going to get 20 to 30 students to sign out of an iPad every single time, right? How do we make sure that they pick up the same iPad again if there's, you've got maybe 20 iPads on a cart? Well, from a teacher experience, if we go into their iPad, we're going to start with Apple Classroom. And one of the best features, I think, in Apple Classroom is you've got this option to assign iPads to students, which means if you've got that cart of iPads, you can have Apple Classroom automatically assign a user to the iPad, so when they pick it up, it presents them with their name. So rather than it looking like this, when you do the assignment, it looks like this. Alistair's picture and name is right at the front, and we just need to swipe up to unlock and start using it. You don't need to try and remember which iPad it was. Apple Classroom will tell you which iPad you should be using. And if it's not you, obviously you've got that option to then go back to classes and select the right one. Now, if we go back to the teacher again, we've still got the great options inside of Apple Classroom where you can go and view the student's iPad screen. You can visually see which app they've got open. So here we can see Alistair's iPad. That's great. But we can also do more with that as well. We can actually go into the Jamf Teacher app, and we can still manage the devices through Jamf Teacher. We put that app layout for the right apps for the right class. Well, as a teacher, you could still go through and say, actually, we want to limit this list even more. So you can say, well, actually, just for this lesson, we're going to focus on 2 apps, rather than having all the apps presented at any given time. And we can have this deployed out. We can see this through Jamf Teacher. And just to double check that this has worked, we'll go back into Apple Classroom, and we can view Alistair's screen, and we can see that that iPad is now limited even more than it was before. And Apple Classroom also has the feature to sign out students from shared iPad sessions. So it's great if that trolley or cart is going to move to a different class. You can just sign out all, and that'll be it. Really, really easy way to get up and running. So just as a sort of like quick overview, as our planning and impact and purposeful parts, these are the main features that we needed to have enabled to get this up and running. Now, this is all really important, but there's some other things that I want to highlight as well as like a good to know, because I think this gets us to a really good point, but again, if I'm in marketing, we can elevate that even more, right? So I thought I'd just throw in a few good to know points here when utilizing shared iPad. If you've never used it before, some caveats, right? And I might throw this out to the room. I'm not a teacher, but I don't mind asking you questions. Wi-Fi, right? We can see right at the very beginning, we need to be connected to the internet because we're utilizing managed Apple accounts. We need to sign in, so we need access to the internet. But what happens if that iPad, for whatever reason, is dropped from the Wi-Fi or it's not connected to a known Wi-Fi network? Does anyone know how to get the option to select a network to come up? There's no wrong. I saw a hand gesture, but I didn't hear anything. Yeah, absolutely. Double-click the lock button, and then you're able to get the Wi-Fi screen to come up. And then you can pick from a known Wi-Fi there. So just double-click that lock button, or if you've got iPads that still have the home button, same process, right? But then you get access to those Wi-Fi network options. Now, we configured our shared iPad for 4 local students, but what happens if we have a 5th student come in who wants to utilize this iPad? What happens there, right? It's not just a, nope, I'm full, you can't use this iPad. What actually happens is, if we have student number 5 who wants to use his iPad, shared iPad will actually remove the last used, not the most recently used user or student, but the oldest student who was the last, like the very first person to log in. So that student number 5 would replace student number 1 in this case, because they were the last student to sign in. That basically means that their local data is no longer on that iPad, and student number 5 then takes that portion. Okay, now we spoke about shared iPad in classes, and we looked at how to assign that. Great thing is that you don't need to go through every single class to assign shared iPad to. What you can do back in Jamf School is that you can select your classes just utilizing the checkbox, and there's a button at the top that says Add Shared iPad. So you can go through it again, define the scope that you're wanting, but you can quickly add your shared iPads to your classes without having to go into each one individually. It's really helpful. But let's say the shared iPads were wanting to be used, but maybe by someone who wasn't in one of those classes. Maybe just a temporary session is what we class them as. Well, we can still actually have this configured inside of Jamf School. Again, if you've got your classes selected, there's another button on the right-hand side which says Enable iPad Temporary Sessions. It's kind of like guest mode on a Mac. Okay, you can sign in, you can do your things, you sign out, but that's the session over. And so that experience changes slightly. We've got our classes set up here, but if we enable this feature, down at the bottom right, what we're going to get is the option to be able to sign in as a guest. So we can still make use of all of the apps that are on the iPad. It kind of goes back to that very first iPad session that I showed you with all the apps laid out. It's like that. But we can still have that temporary session available if we want a little bit more flexibility. Now, we've spoken a lot about stored users. We've got the 4 users who are signed in onto those devices. But what happens if we as admins maybe want to try and free up that space? Maybe there's a software update that we need to do, and we need to remove that data. Well, you can do all of this inside of Jamf School. You just go to your device inventory, and there's a dedicated section for shared users. And inside of here, this is where you'll see all the users. You'll see if there's data that needs to be synced into iCloud, yes or no, how much data is being used. So you can see actually Katrina here, even though as data used and data quoted say the same thing, as I said earlier, when we specify the number of locally stored users, they automatically occupy all of that space. So it's not shareable between other students. But here, we can utilize little crosses on the right-hand side to remove the locally stored user and free up that space, or allowing us to do those software updates. So as a recap, we looked at setting up Apple School Manager correctly, making sure that we were utilizing managed Apple accounts, apps and books, automated device enrollment, and classes. And the same inside of Jamf School, but also with the storage and user quotas and understanding the importance of those. And also how that data moves between our devices and between the actual cloud and content caching server, and trying to avoid those awful dad jokes at the same time. So, hopefully, I know we've covered a lot. I appreciate your brain is probably at capacity in terms of all the great sessions that you've heard this week. But hopefully you can see that it's important to go past just the let's enable shared iPad and away we go. We really want to make this as impactful as possible with the students. And in Jamf School, we've got some of those great features to make it easy for admins, great for students, and great for teachers. I really, really do appreciate you coming here at 9 o'clock on the last day of JNUC. Because we covered so much content, I've created a little shareable link. If you don't want to scan QR codes, totally get that. We've got the link at the very top. So feel free to visit that page. Up there, I've already uploaded the slides from today. So if you want to go back and actually reference them, you can do that. But I've also linked all of the resources that I used to build out this presentation. So hopefully you can go in and have a look at the Apple deployment guides, the Jamf School specific deployment guides as well. All of that is linked there. And if you're in the Mac Admin Slack channel, I'm also there. Feel free to find me and reach out to me if you've got any questions as well. But otherwise, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time this morning. I hope you enjoy the rest of your JNUC day. Thanks. Happy to answer any questions that you, straight up there, like, I've got a question, yes. I think we'll get the microphone to you just for the recording. It's mainly for the recording, I think.
If you've got a question, someone else.
Thank you for the session, very helpful. Can I just ask two very quick questions around temporary sessions?
Yeah.
One, what's the user experience in terms of what apps are displayed, etc.? Is there any restrictions? And then secondly, can Jamf School restrict that temporary session with a PIN code? Because presumably if all apps are available under the temporary session, students might choose temporary session rather than their actual profile.
That's a great question. So let's tackle the first one, which is what does that temporary session look like? If you remember the video that I showed, first of all, when we set up the iPad and we just had like the 3 pages worth of apps, there was no sort of configuration at that point. That's what it would be looking like. Ultimately, whatever you configure inside of Jamf School from in terms of restrictions on the device configuration profile side and the app layer for that, that's what it will look like. All that we're doing with classes is we're enhancing that experience specifically for that class in terms of, right, instead of showing you 30 apps, this year group actually only has access to 10 of those apps. So that's what the temporary session would look like. It would be anything that you haven't defined as part of a class. In terms of the second question around protecting that experience a little bit more, it is really like a guest mode. So if a student is to go into there and do work and then want to get that work back, they're going to have to save it somewhere else. What I would do is I would probably have your main set of shared iPads set up without that option, and then just have another smart group for those shared iPads that you do want to allow temporary sessions. That's probably going to be an easier format to be able to manage between the two. No problem. Yeah, another question.
I have 2 questions. Can you get rid of the guest login?
Yeah, absolutely.
And can you sign a user out? Or
Yes.
will it time out and sign them out?
Oh, that's okay. Time out and sign out. So first one, the temporary session, that guest mode, you can have that enabled or disabled, entirely up to you. You can have a point where if you don't have it set up, you can enable it and then also retrospectively take it back as well. You don't need to wipe the device. It's just a key that you enable, and that's it. In terms of the second question around timeout or sign out, Apple Classroom gives teacher the option to be able to sign students out of all shared iPads. So you can utilize Apple Classroom. There was an option that said assign. You can do unassign, and that basically signs out all of the students from their logged in sessions. You can also, from Jamf School, have them sign out. You don't need to delete their data, but you can have them signed out as well. In terms of like a timeout, I don't think there's a timeout enabled option, that you can't configure it timeout after a certain amount of time. But if a different student was to pick up the iPad, they wouldn't be able to get into that session unless they knew the passcode, right? So they would just essentially select, there was a button at the bottom left-hand corner, which was basically other. You then go to the right class, find yours, your passcode, you then sign in. But thank you for that question. We're making you run today, Jordan. You're getting your steps in.
Thank you for your presentation. What happens if a student is in multiple classes? What restrictions will it adhere to if there are different restrictions for the different classes they're in? And are there ever any conflicts from Jamf School restrictions or settings and and settings that the teacher has set in classroom or in?
Oh, great question. Okay, let's cover everyone likes asking 2 questions. This is great. I'm trying to get me to remember the second one. So the first one was, I've already blanked on it. The first one was around.
The students in multiple classes.
That's it, thank you. So it's all going to be dependent on which class they sign into if you're utilizing that classes option, right? So we saw years group year 1, 2, and 3. And let's say a student is in year 1 and 2. If they go to class 2 and sign in, or year 2, they will get the restrictions and apps based on the class that they select at that point in time, because it's looking for that user in that particular class. At that point, I would be looking at which restrictions you're going to have enabled between different year groups. There might be conflicts at that point, or app conflicts at that point. But ultimately, when you enable classes and the app layer and restrictions, that's tied to the class and the user in that class that you have it selected on. So hopefully that answers that question. And then the second one was, I don't know why I'm blanking this, sorry. Tell me the second one again.
Restrictions from Jamf School to teachers.
Great, yeah. So again, when you're inside the user space and you're inside of Jamf Teaching, you're putting those restrictions in, those are still classed as device restrictions. The only time that you're gonna get the user restrictions are when you enable it inside of classes. So Jamf Teacher works exactly the same way as it did before, even in a shared iPad session. But the restriction side, you probably need to double check on the conflicts there, but ultimately, if you're doing user-based restrictions, device restrictions will probably take priority. There's that conflict of most restrictive wins. You need to probably try that out and test it. But ultimately, Jamf Teacher works exactly the same way as it would do if it's just a one-to-one deployment. Thanks. I can see here my timer, we've got about 4 minutes left, but are there any final questions before we finish up? One here, perfect. And then what we'll do, if you do have any other questions, I'm gonna be on the booth, the main Jamf booth up in the expo hall from about 12 o'clock, so feel free to come and find me then. Can't miss me, I'm the really tall Scottish guy, and I'll definitely answer any more of your questions. But final one today, yeah.
Thanks for the session.
Thanks.
It's a great primer into how to use shared iPad in Jamf School. We just kind of disbanded our Jamf School instance for Jamf Pro.
Okay.
We have a K-12 as well as we're a higher ed institution with
Yep.
a K-12 lab school. Great examples of how to do this in K-12. Any tips for higher ed and really utilizing shared iPad in a higher ed setting, and also Jamf Pro as opposed to Jamf School. Sorry to overrun with.
No, it's all good. That's a really big question, or a slightly shorter question, but with a bigger answer. I'll just blanket with this that there's no easy win at that point in terms of which one's better. They both have their strengths in terms of shared iPad. What I would say, the way that Pro manages the classes side of thing is different to what we showed inside of Jamf School. So you can still enable the classes feature. The user-based restrictions and the app layout specifically, that's where it really changes. But that's maybe something that we can talk more about at the commercial booth if you're around then. If not, then speak to me on the Mac admins and we can connect then, all right? Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate you coming here this morning. I hope you enjoyed the final day of JNUC and hopefully see you up in the expo hall. Thanks.